I'm going to cover another subject which is apparently has not been settled, and that's the issue of observation. In science, we do not observe. We do not use the word observation at all. The word observation belongs to religion. Okay? We do not observe. We do not gawk in science. And people say, well, how can you explain something if you have not observed it? And I don't know how many times I'm going to cover this subject. It's unbelievable that people have, again, mental problems in understanding this. And I'm talking about understanding. Okay, so let's go with some of the issues, the questions. How will you know what to explain if you haven't observed anything to explain? Again, that synthesizes more or less what people have going through their heads. Gaede thinks science has no connection to the real observed world. I don't know where he got that. Again, misunderstanding shows that he's not paying attention. Okay? And yet you observe that light was fast, hence hypothesizing invisible torsion, observe that electric currents have magnetic fields, hence hypothesizing swinging intangible serpentines, observe that gravity is unblockable, etc. Are you going to pretend that your hypothesis in all its nuances popped out of thin air to explain a totally imaginary world? Okay, and let me continue with some of the other questions that people said along those same lines so that we get them all there, okay? They continue and says, you go to the conference, as you put it, and present and explain your invisible, intangible mechanism. Okay, what relevance does the mechanism have to anything if you do not include the visible? Visible, intangible, right? Observation, that's what he's referring to. Another fellow says, you say, look, I can explain how these two magnets, etc. Bill, you just made an observation. My God. And the other fellow says, how the hell can you immediately jump to a belief or hypothesis without having made an observation? This is what's on all these people's minds. What is the problem? Well, the problem is context. These people are not understanding the context. It takes them 2 years to find out what the context is. I don't know how else to explain it. These people are talking about the scientific, so-called scientific method that they learned by rote in high school or in college, and that dates to the 17th century, the so-called 17th century scientific revolution. Well, it wasn't scientific at all. It was a religious revolution, and we're still doing religion. No one is doing science because no one has the scientific method yet. Okay, so we have a problem. We haven't defined what science is, and we do not have a scientific method. What we have is a method of what? Of research. We have a method of research. And the question if the process of researching amounts to science. And I always give the example. You study all week, and then you fail the test on Friday. Okay? So the fact that you studied, that you did research, that you swallowed all these books, that you observed and predicted and hypothesized and theorized, and you go to take the test on Friday and you failed. You did not know. So what was all that research about if you did not learn anything? Is research the same thing as science? See, these people think that science is this eternal process of research of includes several steps, and that it leads to whatever, to a point where they start again. They say, well, now we reach this point, now let's continue studying and do all these steps again. And you reach a point, then you continue studying, and you reach another point, you continue studying, and so on ad infinitum. So we have a problem because the question is whether research is equal to science. That's the issue. The second part of that is that that's the so-called scientific method, which is really the method of religion, includes persuasion. They think it's a question of proving to the jury of peers, what your findings are. And aside from the fact that the findings are not explanations, the findings are really descriptions, usually mathematical descriptions, the question is whether persuasion is science. So we have research and persuasion. Do those two amount to science? This is where the problem is. Okay, so let's put this on the board so we can see it. Okay. These are the observation conclusions that I put the other day. We have a method of research versus the method of explaining rationally. These are two different things. Method of research and persuasion, I'll include that in there, that doesn't amount to science. What amounts to science is method of explaining, in the case of physics, something mechanically. In other words, you have to explain the mechanism. How Mother Nature does gravity, how Mother Nature does magnetism. That's what we're trying to explain. We're trying to explain that invisible world. The visible stuff we already know about. Why? Because we've observed, fine, I don't care. We have the explanations. We have explanations for the visible stuff. We don't have explanations, rational explanations for the invisible stuff. And the main reason is we do not have, no one proposes objects that exist, which are the big problems. And I'll get to that in a second. So we have a method of research is irrational, whereas explanations are something different. Okay? And the explanations that we have from mathematical physics especially are not explanations. They're descriptions put in the guise of explanations. Okay? We have no explanations, and that gets us to the issue that explanations are defined as descriptions. Some of these people think that descriptions and explanations are synonyms, and they're not. A description is not an explanation. An explanation is not a description or a set of descriptions or anything related to description. That's where you got to start, because if you think that explanation and descriptions are synonyms, then you got a problem. Okay? Especially when some people, like I've posted in the past, Donald Simonek, he says, science is not explaining, science is describing. So apparently this emeritus professor thinks that there is a difference between explaining and describing. And at least there he's right. Whether he understands what the difference is, that's a different issue. But he realized that explaining and describing are not synonyms. And what we have today are descriptions. We don't have explanations. And what we do have are irrational so-called explanations, because they're dismissed as philosophy. They don't care about that. They care about the descriptions. Okay? So yeah. And then studying doesn't mean understanding. Okay? Method of persuasion is religion, again. Okay? And it's irrelevant, subjective, to begin an explanation of a mechanism by saying that I observed. You don't begin in a conference saying, I observed. Because right now, when you say that, whether you did or not is irrelevant. So let me state that. All these people who say, you cannot explain without observing. Irrelevant. 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 I don't care if you did observe. It's irrelevant. You don't begin your explanation of a mechanism saying, I observed. Nobody cares if you observed or not. Nobody cares. It's not part of the explanation. The explanation has to be objective. When you say, I observed, and I'm going to show that in a second why you have a problem if you use the word observe. But when you say, I observed, you're introducing testimony. It's like you're in a witness, in a trial, and you say, I observed. Well, you observed. Does the jury believe you because you say that you observed? Keep that in mind. I'm getting to that in a second. Okay, and besides the fact that you need not have observed, by the way, to explain a mechanism, that's one issue. And then the other issue is that some people, like I talk about Stephen Hawking, he never observed a black hole. Doesn't mean that he cannot explain a mechanism involving a black hole. He makes an assumption, and then he explains it with that. He doesn't have to have observed a black hole. Okay, so keep all these things in mind. And sometimes you observe, and what was your state of mind? Did you observe the spirit move the curtain, or was it maybe the air? So you say, I observed the spirit. I observed God come down to earth. I observed the ETs come down to earth and build the pyramids. You did not observe this, but people say observe because they're trying to introduce testimony. Okay, so that's another issue here that's floating around. Okay, so what we have is a difference between a method of research and persuasion. Okay. And these are the steps. And of course, when you do this, it's known as religion. The first step, you say, well, you have to observe before you can explain. And so what you're doing is really introducing subjectivity, because we don't need to say that you observed a phenomenon, whether you did or not, to explain a phenomenon objectively. Okay? And here we have the true, genuine scientific method. Where do you see in there? Observe, observation. We have a hypothesis, which are the assumptions. It includes the objects that are going to be mediating the transactions, the phenomena. We have the definitions. You have to have definitions, otherwise we don't really know what you're saying when you're using those words. And then you have the initial scene. You got to prepare the groundwork for your theory. Okay? And then you tell your theory, which is essentially in physics, mechanisms, causes. Okay? That's what it's all about. Okay, so here we have, one guy said the other day, what if I film an event? Again, observation, right? Because whether you do it with a camera or with your eyes doesn't matter. You're going to present this, and you're going to say, here's a movie. I mean, you can't deny this. And you're kind of insinuating to the jury that, hey, you got to accept it because not only did I see it and I observed it, I filmed it. I bring it here to you for you to see. And so here I filmed this observation. Okay, I filmed this fellow. His name is Felix the Cat. And I want you to see what he does. Grabs a brick. Okay, he goes in there and just throws it through the window. I mean, I filmed it. Okay? I was there. I filmed it. Any questions? It turns out that I was there, but you weren't. And you're the juror, one of them. We have 12 jurors. And half of them are from China or from Greece or from some other place. They weren't there. And I show them, I say, look, this is how the window broke. A brick was thrown through the window. Well, I know because, I was there and I filmed it. But they say, well, I wasn't there. I don't know if that film is for real. I don't trust your observation. I mean, with a film, it still gives you more credibility, but imagine I didn't film it. Then I say, well, a brick went through the window. Do they have to believe me because I say I observed? Does that make any difference? Am I trying to influence the jury by saying I observed? I'm just testifying. People think that science is like a trial where people can present witnesses, testimony. And they say, I observed. Well, if he says he observed, who's going to doubt him? And yet people lie on the witness stand, don't they? They commit perjury. It's known as perjury. Okay. So should we believe a film? Well, here I'm going to present another film, okay? And we have a jury of 12 flat earthers, okay? And we show them this. Give me a second here. I went on the other side. Sometimes it falls overboard. It goes to the other side of it. Okay, this is what I show them. This was filmed real time, according to NASA. And we have these astronauts on the moon. We have many pictures of these guys in space and on the moon and everywhere. So I show it to a panel of flat earthers, 12 flat earthers. And I said, look, I filmed it. NASA, you got to believe them. These are professionals, PhDs. They're supported by the government, by your taxes. You got to believe them. Who's going to doubt it? Do you think the flat earthers will believe it? I just showed them a movie. I say it was filmed real time, maybe 1968, 1969, right? And they say, well, I wasn't there. I don't believe it. I think it was made in Hollywood. And thank God they filmed it, because if they hadn't filmed it and I just said, look, I observed, I was there. A little old man says, 80 years old now, says, I was there. I filmed it. Or maybe one of the astronauts who's still around, he said, look, I was there. I was jumping on the moon. I give you my testimony. I was not only observed, I was doing it. Will they believe? Have you convinced the jury of flat earthers? And if you did not, then what was the point of introducing the word observe into your testimony, into your explanation? If instead you say, look, let us assume, this picture, this movie is man jumping on the moon. Okay, we concede the assumption. It's just an assumption so far. We don't have to believe it. We don't have to not believe it. Belief plays no part so far. You make an assumption. You say, let us assume man went to the moon. I'm this guy. I was jumping on the moon. That's the assumption. Now you're going to explain maybe gravity, maybe something else. You're going to explain the theory with that. You did not have to say at all, under no circumstances, I observed. I was there. I did it. That's testifying. And it's like saying that you were there when they built the pyramids and you saw the ETs build the pyramid. I was there. I observed. That's all you're saying. You're testifying. Testimony is outlawed in science. Observation, observation meaning with the eyes, is outlawed in science. I don't care if you did observe or not. We do not begin an explanation by saying, I observed. And I'm not sure how else to tell you all this. Okay, where does this take us? Well, first of all, the so-called scientific method, the one from the 17th century, I showed it the other day. You have all these irrational conclusions and theories that we have today, and you can go through them later on, but there you can read them. They're all irrational. One is more irrational than the other one. Okay, so if that's the scientific method, including observation, and led us to these theories, these conclusions, then well, you reach your own conclusion. How much observation is worth in science. Okay, maybe that so-called scientific method, which includes observation, is not science at all, because we ended up with these irrational conclusions. Okay, one fellow says, one more issue here. He says, a belief can be true or false. Hypothesis defined as justified belief that is not known to be true. Not known to be true. Okay, known by whom? By the Pope or who? Dalai Lama, maybe? I don't know. Who's got to determine that it's true? Who is the judge? Okay, thus a hypothesis is a belief that is backed up with some supporting evidence. Evidence, okay, for evidence for whom? You know, what is evidence to you for truth? For me, that's same as evidence for false. Observation, experiment, but it still may be false. Okay, so all you said is that whatever the guy said, whatever he proposed, could be false. Could be true, could be false. We still don't know. It depends on your opinion, on your upbringing, on your state of mind, on so many things. And so far, you said nothing. A theory is a substantiated explanation for an occurrence that has come to a conclusion. To a conclusion. So someone put a stop and says, you should not investigate anymore. Okay. A judgment or decision reached by reasoning, though not unimpeachable. Well, you stopped it. You said it has come to a conclusion, to a stop, to a dead stop. But you say it may not be unimpeachable. So what's different between the theory and the hypothesis? Apparently both are proposals backed by some evidence or without, and they both are impeachable. They both could be false. So what have you distinguished between hypothesis and theory? Seem to be the same thing. One guy says, assuming a hypothesis in this case is a theory, because that's essentially he's saying it's a belief. I'm not sure what belief has to do with science. But essentially, he's saying it's an explanation that a person has for which he says there's not enough evidence, okay, with some supporting evidence. And the other one says a little more supporting evidence, but they both could be false. So you see that these people have no clue whatsoever. They've never defined these terms, hypothesis and theory. In fact, today, theory is the same thing as a hypothesis. They think they're synonyms, except for the fact that hypothesis is also taken to be a prediction, an assumption, a description. Hypothesis is everything. In other words, the word hypothesis has never been defined because it's so broad it incorporates everything. Is a prediction the same thing as an explanation? Is a description the same thing as an assumption? These are the issues you got to resolve. So in your religion, hypothesis equals theory. That's my conclusion, because there's no difference. Both can be false, opinion, belief. A hypothesis becomes a theory by casting ballots. You vote for it. Okay, every 50% plus one, that converts the hypothesis into a theory. Is that what it is, voting? And voting also morphs theory into fact. You turn it into fact and you say, well, we came to a conclusion. You know, like they came to a conclusion on black hole. That's not challengeable anymore. They came to a conclusion on dark matter. That cannot be challenged anymore because it's no longer a theory. Now it's a fact. They have this dark energy. Was proven to be true, a fact in 1998. That's what these folks that came with that idea won the Nobel Prize for. Okay, and so it's now a fact. Now you can't challenge it. You know, it's no longer a theory. Now it's a fact. It's truth. You have to believe in it. And again, it shows that all that has nothing to do with science. It has to do with religion. First, we have an irrational theory proposal, and then you're supposed to believe it, which again has to do with religion, not with science. Science we do not believe. Science we explain and we understand. And that's when science, that's where we draw the line on science. What continues on the other side of that line is known as belief, opinion, and that's known as religion. This side of science, it's only objective explanation of a mechanism. Where do we take all this? Where do all these notions pop into the minds of these poor folk? Well, they pop into their minds because of two words, the word object and the word exist. That's why. We've never settled what an object is and what the word exist means. That's why they talk about observation. They want hands-on. They want to go to the lab and do something. Okay? They want to touch and see and prove through experience, through intuition, through whatever, you know, maybe measurement and calculations. They think all that's science. So let's show why these people are so wrong and why observation has nothing whatsoever to do with science, okay? And it's because of the definition of the word object and exist. I'm going to put a little picture here, and I'm going to talk in the background, and let's see if you can follow along, okay? So please try to pay attention. Here it goes. Okay, we have the Earth on one side of the universe, and we have the Klingons, Klingon land on the other side of the universe, okay? And they're 1 gazillion light years apart. We have no chance of ever seeing these guys. We can't see them. We can't touch them, okay? We're so far apart, we're not even close. We can't see them or touch them. We cannot smell them, hear them, nothing. We can't even send signals to them. Okay, so now here on Earth, that's you on Earth in the yellowish, brownish coloring, and you have a table near you in your house. I ask you, is that table a physical object? And you say, well, yes, it is. Yes, it's a physical object. And I ask you, why is it a physical object? Well, because I can see and I can touch it. Okay, does it exist? Yes. Why? Well, because I can see it and I can touch it. See, the word exist and the word object are synonyms to all these people. They think that an object is that which you can touch and see, and exist means that you can touch or see it. Okay, it turns out that you cannot see or touch the table that the Klingon has. I asked the Klingon, if I could ask him, Mr. Klingon, does that table that you have near you, is that an object? And he would say, yeah, that is an object. Why? Well, because I can see and I can touch it. Okay, does it exist? Yes. Why? Well, because I can see and I can touch it. And it turns out that the guy on the left, he cannot see or touch the Klingon's table, and the Klingon cannot see or touch the table that the guy on the left has, the human. And so now here's the million-dollar questions, 2 questions. Is the table that the Klingon has, is that an object, yes or no? Is it an object for the human on Earth? And you might answer, well, no, it's not an object for him because he cannot see or touch it. Does it exist? Well, no, because he cannot see or touch it. So we have a problem because it turns out that here we have a table that the Klingon says exists and that is an object because he can see and touch it, but you cannot see or touch it, so you say that it's not an object and it doesn't exist by definition, and vice versa. Your table, the Klingon cannot see or touch it, and so on and so forth. So we have a problem with the definitions of object and exist because we cannot use them consistently and they become subjective. They become subjected to seeing and touching. So this pencil is an object not because it has shape, but because I can see it and I can touch it. But for the Klingon, this is not a pencil, this is not an object, because he can't see or touch it. Does it exist? No, because he can't see or touch it. So we have a problem with the definitions here. We can't continue using the object notion that we have today, which is see, touch, or the exist notion today that we have today, because we can't see it, because it relies on see and touch, on these 2 senses. Okay, and yes, an object is that which has shape, and exist means that an object has location. Once you define it like that, it doesn't matter if it's a Klingon who says it or you. The word table always refers to an object because a table has shape, here and in the land of the Klingons. And does it exist? Well, if it has location with respect to other matter in the universe, very objective definition. If it has location, then it exists by definition and not because you can see or touch it. Okay? Again, observation only muddles the situation. Observation is not part of science. Observation is testimony and is part of religion. And whether you did observe or not an experiment or a phenomenon or whatever, it doesn't matter. It is irrelevant anyways. You don't begin an explanation, which is what science is about, by saying that you observed. I don't know if that sank into some of these people's brains.